Hello, everyone. If you've watched Wordfence Live recently, you've heard us talking about some of the worst hacks and some of the worst security mistakes that we've seen. It's critical to know that many of those incidents could have been prevented with better credential hygiene. So today, we're going to talk all about that, talk all about passwords, how to keep yourself safe online, keep your online identity safe from attackers looking to the keys for your front door. Stay tuned. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Wordfence Live. Today is September 29th, 2020. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a customer support engineer here at Wordfence. In a few moments, I'm going to be joined by two familiar faces here on Wordfence Live, QA engineer, threat analyst Ram Gall, as well as threat analyst Chloe Chamberlain. In today's episode of Wordfence Live, well, we have a good one. We're going to be talking about the 10 worst security password mistakes that we have ever seen. So we're going to be counting those down from 10 to 1 to the worst password mistake that we see commonly. So, we've been giving swag away every week now. So if you want to get in on that, now's going to be your chance. Tim is going to be posting in the chat a link to a form, and you just need to be one of the first 5 to correctly guess the number one reason why passwords are typically compromised. So just use the form and guess the mistake that is commonly made, and then be one of the first 5 to guess it, and you're going to win some free Wordfence swag. And I think Ram is going to show you what you will win when we bring him in. So if you've won some swag in the past, feel free to send us a picture. You can tweet that to us at Wordfence, and we might throw it up on the stream here. So if you've won something in the past, go ahead and send us a picture. Back to passwords, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We really can't escape them. They're the keys to our digital life, whether you're looking at an app on your phone or your bank account on your phone or on the website, your WordPress site, your social media presence. It's all used by passwords there. So if you find yourself using the same password on all of your sites and one of those sites ends up getting breached, then your entire digital life is at stake, and there could be some bad issues there. So we're going to talk about that for the remainder of the show and give some tips as well as some stories that we've seen here, some horror stories pretty much of password mistakes. According to Verizon's data breach report, weak or stolen passwords account for 81% of hacking related security breaches. So always good to be using complex passwords, and it really reduces the chance of running into one of these horror stories here. So as I said, we're going to talk all about passwords, and this really isn't just for WordPress users. This is good for anybody that that spends time online, checking social media, email, pretty much anybody. So sharing this video or this information that you learn here or that you already know to people who may not be using this sort of information and protecting themselves, it can go a long way in protecting somebody's online presence. And I say that, I know a lot of you are probably using some good, strong passwords and following these recommendations. But we've all seen that friend on Facebook who gets the Ray-Ban sunglasses hack, and you're casually strolling through your feed and you see pictures of Ray-Bans from somebody who doesn't typically even wear glasses, and there's some links to buy. And you don't want to click those links, by the way. And if Chloe has taught me anything on Wordfence Live over the past 3 or 4 months, it's not to click those and not click on anything that Chloe sends you as well. So, but we're going to help you help those people today. And if there's anything that you get out of this and some of these stories, that will be a bonus. So we're going to look at keeping us all safe and using better credentials and password management. And what better way to learn than through stories of what we've seen go wrong commonly. And we're going to be telling some stories of the 10 worst mistakes, and we might even hear Ram's horror story voice during this as well. So if you're excited to hear that or excited about the stream today, hit the like button below the video here. We'll be sure to make similar content going forward. You can also hit the subscribe button. And if you hit the bell, you'll be notified whenever we go live in the future. Typically, we're going live every Tuesday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. We're broadcasting to YouTube. I always recommend, don't put anything sensitive into the chat or the comments. If you have anything specific to your site, if you're having issues on your site, rather than sharing the URL or anything like that, you would want to write into us at feedback@wordfence.com. And you can use the subject line Wordfence Live, and we'll get eyes on that and help you the best that we can. So without further ado, let's get started by bringing in QA engineer, threat analyst Ram Gall, as well as Chloe Chamberlain. How's it going for you two?
It's still hot in Arizona.
I imagine. Yeah.
The summer is endless.
It's really rainy and ugly here today. A little chilly too. I'm sure you probably wouldn't mind it though. We're in the 60s, maybe low 70s.
That sounds amazing.
How about you, Chloe? Are you in Maine still?
Yeah, still here, and the fall colors are starting to peek through, so I am very much loving it.
You're not leaving anytime soon after seeing that, are you?
Nope, not at all. Can't go back to Florida.
So I guess I'm supposed to show off the swag in a world where Wordfence sent you socks for winning our quizzes. These are awesome, by the way. They're very comfortable. I'm wearing one of them right now, but I'm not going to show you my butt with the other sock on.
I tried to talk Ram into modeling the sock for us, but we decided against it. But we did get a good look at the sock there. So use the form if you have not already. Tim is posting it actively now. And you can get your guess in. I believe it'll be, you want to guess what the most common password mistake that we see here, and it's going to be the number one on our list. So we're going to count down from 10 to 1. We got a lot to talk about, a lot of stories here today. So where are we going to start, Ram? Should we start pretty basic?
Yeah, why not? I mean, we were going to cover common password attack methods, right?
Yeah, let's jump into so what common password stealing methods that we see frequently here.
Yeah, I don't know.
Should we cover what a password is?
Yes.
Let's start very basic. Yes.
Yeah.
So for you two, Chloe, what is a password exactly?
Yeah, so we all use passwords every day. It's something you're mindless of at this point, probably because you log in all the time. So nobody really thinks about what exactly a password is. And so if you recall, you're entering a username and a password when you log into your sites. And so your username is acting as a form of identification. So it's saying, I am Chloe, or I am Bad Monkey 201, whatever your username is, you're claiming your identity there. And so your password is your form of authentication. So it's basically proving your identity, saying, okay, I am Chloe, and this is proof that I'm Chloe because I know my password is password 123 or whatever your password is. Hopefully it's not password 123. But yeah, so your password is your form of authentication. And so if someone steals that, they can falsely claim your identity, basically. And so it's incredibly important that we spend our time focusing on how to make sure that we keep our passwords secure, as they protect all sorts of information, from personally identifiable information to credit card data to your customers' data. If you have a WordPress site, your password into your WordPress site could possibly lead to other people's information being stolen. So yeah, that's a password.
That was going to be my follow-up question. What do you have to lose by using a bad password? And really, it's a lot, especially if you're reusing that same password on multiple sites. And like you said, it can also affect other people as well. So you're not really, you need to use a complex password for yourself, but then it can trickle down to others. So Ram, you had mentioned common password stealing attack methods. What do we normally see there?
Well, pretty much the one of the most common password stealing. It's not really. I shouldn't say password stealing methods. One of the main ways that attackers try to impersonate you is by something called credential stuffing. It's where they look for username and password combinations found in other data breaches, and then try out those combinations on a whole bunch of sites, especially if they have a reason to think that that person has an account on that site. And I don't know if you covered this, but according to Verizon's data breach report, weaker stolen passwords account for like 81% of hacking-related security breaches on web applications. What that report also mentions is that one of the most targeted things that attackers do once they get in is hunt down more credentials. So it's kind of like this cascade of they hack in using stolen credentials, they steal more credentials, then they use those credentials to hack into more places.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like if somebody finds a username and password in a breach, when it comes to this attack method of credential stuffing, what would typically be the first group of sites they're trying these on? Is it likely going to be social media or bank accounts or something along those lines,
Yeah,
I'm guessing?
honestly, email accounts if they can get it, because if an attacker can gain access to your email account, they pretty much have everything else, because almost all accounts have some sort of password reset mechanism that's doable via email.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so that's one good reason to make sure that you're not using the same password, and that's something that we talk about, every week here, and pretty commonly, because that's something Wordfence itself looks for. We have a feature that checks to see if a password was found in a breach, and if it was, then you're vulnerable across other sites. So having a complex and unique password for your sites, for each social media application, for your bank account, and so on and so forth, is very important there. So what's next? The first one, that was credential stuffing. What's another type of attack that we typically see?
well, there's brute force and dictionary attacks. And Chloe, can you explain the difference between those? Because, it's one of those things that's not always super obvious to everyone.
Yeah, so those are your password cracking attacks. So you're going to have your dictionary attack, which is basically a list of common dictionary words, all dictionary words, just a bunch of dictionary words like puppy dog, dog, cat, just everything in the dictionary. And so an attacker is trying to use those dictionary words to guess your password. They can use combinations of dictionary words. They can use one dictionary word. And then that brings us into brute force attacks, which were a little bit different. And so that's just randomly computing different variations of characters, letters, words, numbers, anything. It's just brute forcing any possible combination of characters and words that you possibly can. And one other thing here is also rainbow tables. A rainbow table attack is when there's a pre-computed table of hashes, which is how passwords are typically stored. And so it basically, a hash is one way. You can't decrypt a hash, essentially. So what attackers do is they create these tables full of hashes for common dictionary words, for example, and they will compare the hashes in their rainbow table to the hashes they have obtained through some sort of data breach, and try and figure out what those passwords are based on those hashes.
Cool. Yeah, rainbow tables always kind of like fascinated me, because they're, well, just the amount of work it takes to like make one of those.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. I'm not very familiar with that. That's definitely something to consider. Now, the third one is a little more, I guess, basic than that we're going to talk about, and that's shoulder surfing. So for anybody not familiar with that, Ram, it's pretty basic, right?
Yeah, it is exactly what it sounds like. If someone's looking over your shoulder while you're typing in your password, and by the way, people have made like smartphone apps that can like take videos of you entering your password and figure out your password from like weird angles just by how you type them, then they can figure out what your password is. Though that's usually only in like very public places, and that's usually for like targeted attacks, but it's still something to be mindful of.
Yeah, like anytime you're at working from a coffee shop or the airport or something, you always want to be, um, cautious of what you're inputting, what you're accessing, and that's just with typing in your password alone, not to mention the different networks and everything along those lines. So when you're out in public and you're inputting this information, it's good to always be cautious. So that's another thing to consider. Now, the next attack, social engineering, right?
Let's have Chloe do this one. This is one of her favorites. She's social engineered you like a bunch of times, right, Scott?
I vaguely remember a few, yeah, where I got hacked, thanks to Chloe. But
you don't remember the number of times you got hacked and didn't even know it, though.
I'm sure. Yes. Like I said at the beginning of the show, I'm done with Chloe hacking me. I'm not clicking on anything else. There's no more comments on the WordPress site, Sally's cat blog, all that. I've been hacked 2 or 3 times. So tell us about social engineering, Chloe.
Yeah. So social engineering I like to think of it as it is a psychological attack, essentially. So what you're doing is you're basically trying to social engineer or trick someone socially into performing a behavior that they might not otherwise do necessarily. So for example, if I walk into a building with a UPS suit on or something, but I'm not with UPS, and I walk in and I say, I'm here to deliver a package to Sally Sue, and they let me go in. So that is one really simple example of social engineering. So I basically tricked them into thinking I'm a UPS person so that they would allow me to enter their facilities. And so social engineering can happen with passwords. You've probably gotten phone calls where this is social security number, or not social security number, but like, I need your social security number. Those types of things, that's what social engineering is. So you want to be very mindful when someone is trying to get your password over the phone, saying their help desk, and certain situations like that. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Unfortunately, I'm sure we've all, gotten similar phone calls to that. I get the one where it's the PC desktop support or something, fairly regularly. And, it's unfortunate how many, people that probably gets. But with social engineering, you really you got to watch. And like we talked about earlier, we have some examples of this. I think Chloe got RAM once in one of our Wordfence live videos, and that was fun. At least once, right? RAM.
At least once.
Yeah, so you can go back, and it may have been a month or 2 ago. You can check those out here on YouTube. Chloe sort of walks you through the process and shows exactly what's happening, on a site if she gets her claws in there, and it's pretty cool to see. So that was the 4th type. That's social engineering. So what about phishing?
Phishing is interesting. Phishing typically just refers to the process of like sending an email and pretending it's from someone else and trying to get, the person you're sending it to perform an action like, entering their credentials or clicking on a link. But the thing is, phishing actually kind of covers a whole bunch of things. One of the most effective attacks is something called spear phishing, where if you specifically, do some research on someone who works for a company and you send them a targeted email that looks like it's from their boss, it's going to get a lot more results. And then there's also, phishing. If certain types of phishing definitely fall under the social engineering umbrella, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, that's something, a lot of our viewers right now might be seeing regularly. Depending on what sort of company you work for, you might get those emails where, they're testing you. You don't want to click on, and you got to be aware of that. But, it happens regular. Now, you mentioned spear phishing. That's a very targeted attack. Is that correct?
Spear phishing is generally a targeted attack, and spear phishing attacks are often extremely successful, and they're often one of the ways that companies actually end up getting breached. There's other things with weird names like vishing, which is actually that whole leaving a voicemail, or spimming, which I guess is using an IM client to like pretend to be someone else. But they're all effectively variants on some form of social engineering, getting someone to take an action because they think you're someone they trust.
Yeah, we did a short little thing on phishing on the podcast. I believe it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. So if anybody, that's not. I don't think that's as common as a term. Whenever you hear phishing and spear phishing is a little more common to see. So if anybody's curious about that, you can go back and listen to the podcast. There was some cool statistics in that. So phishing, that was the attack type number 5. Now type 6. What do we have here?
Wireless sniffing.
Yeah. So we didn't.
This is one I'm not very familiar with. So what do you have, Chloe?
Yeah, so we put wireless sniffing, but there's this whole category of wireless attacks, basically. So wireless sniffing is basically an attacker's maybe sitting in a coffee shop, they've turned their packet capturer on, and they're just listening, they're observing the packets that cross the internet. So when you're on a public Wi-Fi, everything that's happening on that public Wi-Fi is technically public, and so basically someone can connect to that and capture all the traffic that's being sent in that network. And so what they can do is they can capture those packets, and if the site doesn't have HTTPS or SSL TLS certificate, it can be read most of the time. So for example, WordPress, if you enter your password into your WordPress site, it sends it in plain text if you don't have that SSL TLS certificate installed. So basically with wireless sniffing, you have an attacker on the network watching everything that sends back and forth, and they can capture your passwords by observing the sites that you're interacting with and entering your passwords too. And as well, in addition to that, there's also rogue access points and evil twins, which are networks that look like a legitimate guest network, but it's actually a attacker that has set up a rogue wireless access point that you are connecting to and sending all your data through and everything. So that's something to be very mindful of. So if you go to Starbucks, make sure that you're actually connecting to the Starbucks Wi-Fi, and make sure that you're using a VPN when you are on those public Wi-Fis and networks, so that your data can't be intercepted and read. And I think that brings us into the next attack type too, which is very similar.
Yeah.
What do we have for attack type 7?
Man in the middle, which is basically just sort of a similar category to wireless sniffing. And again, it mostly does happen on wireless networks, but it can also happen if, say, you're connecting to a site on a connection that's not protected by an SSL or TLS certificate. And again, this mostly happens on unsecured wireless networks. Wireless sniffing works best on connections that aren't protected by SSL or TLS certificates, but it can also happen on poorly designed wired networks, or on networks where a malicious insider has a way to spy on network traffic. And it's basically they're just listening to the traffic somehow or another. Maybe they've got intercepted one of the wires and put a little listener in place. Something called a packet squirrel will do that. I think I've got one laying around somewhere. I haven't actually ever used it for anything malicious, don't worry, but they do exist.
Yeah. So those are some pretty interesting things to check out. The 7 different attack types that we have there. So if you need any more information about those, you can look those up, and those are pretty handy to be familiar with, and it helps you protect yourself. Now, we asked people where they're streaming or viewing the stream from. I see a few PA people. I'm just south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have Allentown, Oxnard, California, Pottstown, PA. I'm not sure where Pottstown is. We got Susan in Pittsburgh. I see Susan a good bit, so she's getting a lot of good information. I know we had her last week here, so welcome back, Susan. We appreciate it. Toronto, Ohio. So thanks everybody for joining us. We hope everybody got their guests in for the swag. So now we're going to jump into the 10 mistakes. So those were the different attack types that we see commonly for password stealing or attack methods. So those are some things to look out for. Now we're going to count down the 10 mistakes that we see. So Ram, do you want to start us off with mistake number 10?
Sure. Mistake number 10 is not using a password manager. And this is a pretty common mistake we see all the time. And you probably know some people who are doing this right now, and maybe even you do this. And maybe you know people who don't trust password managers, which is a reasonable stance to take in some circumstances. So, like password managers, it's a risk management solution. Security is about minimizing risks because you can't ever eliminate risks. So, defense in depth is what it's about. You can't eliminate risks, so you have to mitigate them as best you can. And you might not absolutely need a password manager, but using one makes it a lot easier to avoid the rest of the mistakes. Like, they have a bunch of different mechanisms in place to prevent most of the rest of the mistakes you're using.
Yeah, I was going to say one of those I know with OnePass that I commonly use is just the ease of setting a 2FA code and integrating that with OnePass. So if anybody's not using 2FA on a lot of their sites and not using a password manager, you could kind of get two birds with one stone there. So what are the common password managers there? I see them on the screen now, Ram.
We've got 1Password, we've got LastPass, we've got Keeper, we've got Dashlane, we've got KeePass, which comes in a bunch of different variants. And I suspect there are definitely some others. And I guess everyone's kind of wondering what happens if your password manager gets compromised, because that could be bad because all your eggs are in one basket. So I guess it actually did happen to LastPass, but even in those cases where it got compromised, the vault still ended up safe and still encrypted, and it still gives users an easier way to go and change all the compromised passwords as fast as possible after resetting their root password.
Yeah, so I know for OnePass, there's a long secret key that you have to keep safe, and then there's also a long password that you should set as well. So there's a few different complex things there that would need to be accessed to gain access to those. And 1Password has made things a lot easier for me. So if you're out there and you're not using these yet, just something to consider and look into. And you'll see that it's pretty easy to grasp, and it definitely makes it a lot safer. So that brings us to, did we cover that whole section there, Ram?
I think we did. I think there's a few things we might want to cover about how password managers keep passwords safe. Now, we've mentioned hashing, which is a one-way operation. I don't think we actually mentioned salting, which is scattering in random characters so that you can't use rainbow tables on them, though I do believe one of our commenters brought this up. Yes, salting is when you add extra characters before hashing a password in order to keep it safe, so that the site you're logging into, if it knows the salt, it can combine the salt with whatever you input and hash it and compare it to the hash it has in its system to see if you enter the right password. Now, password managers can't really use hashing because they do have to actually be able to retrieve a copy of your actual password to enter it in. So they'll usually use something like a symmetric key algorithm to actually encrypt it. Usually something like AES, which is industry standard and very secure and considered mostly uncrackable unless you're talking about like side channel attacks. It's only the implementations that are insecure, not the actual algorithm. So.
Okay. Yeah, now I know we talked about this before, but when it comes to password managers, and like I said, we've talked about these tips before, but make sure you're using a strong master password and 2FA if possible, and this is for your password manager itself. As well as, and I remember Chloe bringing this up a few weeks ago, using two separate accounts for work and personal life. And it's just safer as far as your work information and your personal information. So that's something that I've found to be very convenient and easy. So you would want an account for all of your social media and banking and personal things, and then a separate password manager account for your work things. And you also want to use the longest password it can possibly generate for those. So you're going to see some of the bad passwords here shortly. or we may have, I don't think we've shown them yet. So you're going to want to do the opposite of that with these password managers, because you just need to keep everything safe. And if you're using a password manager, it makes it much, much easier to use very complex passwords. So that brings us into mistake number 9. We're counting down from 10 to 1 here. Chloe, do you want to go over this mistake?
Yeah, sure. So mistake number 9 is people sharing passwords. Huge mistake. You should never ever share your password with someone unless it's like you have to. There's no other route. But we looked at a couple of different studies, and we found that 52% share their streaming site passwords. So like Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, probably with family members and friends. I think my little sister actually does that, which is terrible. But
I used to do it too. I'm sorry. I learned better.
Yeah, my biggest pet peeve now is I have a really complex password for my Netflix. So when I go to log into a TV, that's like the worst experience ever, trying to type it in. But in another survey found by LastPass, they actually found that 91% of the people they interviewed knew that reusing passwords was bad, but 59% of those respondents still reused the same passwords. So it's one of those things that we all know is wrong. And I mean, I've done it too. I'm sure a lot of people have done it. You've shared your passwords. It's something that you should avoid as much as you possibly can, because sharing your password is sharing your authentication with someone else. So someone else can claim your identity, basically. And so if you have to, so if you have a team, for example, and you need to access one site altogether, they don't have any you can make separate accounts. It's one site. You can only have one access point. What you need to do there is you can share your password because you have to. There's no other route. Make sure that only those with the need to know have access to that account, valid need to know, and make sure that you have 2FA enabled for that account if possible. If that account has the ability to monitor user activity, maybe enable that. You should enable that. It's not a common thing to have, but if they do have it, then I would definitely do that. And then if someone is ever removed from that team that has access to that platform, make sure that you change the password immediately after that has happened, so you avoid scope creep and that person obtaining privileges throughout their tenure at the company. And if they're ever fired, let go, they quit, whatever, make sure that you change the password as well so that they don't gain access to it. And so that brings me to WordPress. You do not need to share your password with WordPress. You can create as many user accounts as you want, and you can give them the least amount of privileges they need to do their job. So if you need to give someone admin access on your site to install a plugin or something, just create a separate admin user account. And when they're done doing what they need to do, you can either downgrade it to a subscriber account, or you can delete the account completely. It's just really important you don't hand out your password to people. I've seen several times where there's one admin account on a WordPress site that is shared among several people. So then you lose all that accountability with each individual account and all sorts of different things. So when you're also creating those separate accounts, make sure that you're giving them the appropriate privileges. So if all they need to do is write a blog post, and make sure you give them contributor access. If you're giving it out to support, perhaps you can try giving them author capabilities before you give them, or not author, but editor capabilities before you give them administrative access. So just try and give them little amount of access to the sites, and make sure you're not giving your passwords out to other people for your admin account. And then again, if you ever need to share your password with someone, there's no other option. Just make sure that you trust them, and make sure that as soon as they're done with the access they need for that account, that you change the password, literally the second they're done, because that's really important, so they can't get back in.
Yeah, if you absolutely have to share credentials, you would definitely want it to be in an encrypted fashion and not through plain text, through email, text message, so on and so forth. That's the absolute worst case scenario there. And it's just not needed, as Chloe said, with WordPress, because you can simply create another account and start with the least privilege necessary, which is something we bring up frequently, and then go from there. So our next one, Ram, this is similar to one of the attack methods that we had talked about. What is our eighth mistake here?
Paranoia at the airport.
That's me.
Yes. It's like Panic at the Disco. It's emote at the location. Anyway, so it's basically not being aware of surroundings when using passwords. And, you know, when I mention airports, coffee shops, basically any public place where you're going to be doing like sensitive computer working in public, shoulder surfing is way more likely if there are other people around. I mean, 2020, I suspect we'll see a marked drop in shoulder surfing attacks, and also probably man-in-the-middle on open Wi-Fi attacks. But it's still a good idea to, you know, be aware of your surroundings. Take precautions when entering in personal information into devices or filling out forms in public. And realistically, the aware of surroundings means both, you know, am I surrounded by people and am I on an open Wi-Fi hotspot? I actually do have a horror story. I did get my credit card number stolen about 15 years ago at the open Wi-Fi hotspot of a coffee shop that I used to work in. And like ever since, I have been way more paranoid about open Wi-Fi hotspots. So that generally is one of those things where just being aware of where you're doing stuff, try to avoid opening personal accounts in public, try to avoid doing online shopping. And if you really have a habit of working in coffee shops, maybe get a screen filter so that people can't see over your shoulder as easily.
Yeah, that would make it difficult to see from odd angles, as you mentioned earlier, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, also, use a VPN. VPNs aren't actually great at guarding your privacy from anyone who's really interested in seeing what you're doing, but they are incredibly useful for preventing someone on an open Wi-Fi network from, you know, reading what you're doing, which is really the main use you'll be using them for anyway. So, yeah, VPNs are great for that one use case.
It makes lots of uncomfortable when I'm like on an airplane and like the person diagonal from me is like just a business person and they're just logging into everything, like and I can just see everything they're doing. I'm like, I don't want to look, but I feel tempted to.
I can see your API keys.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely got to be aware of your surroundings when you're logging into things. So that was number 8, you know. Be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of who can see what when you're entering passwords and personal information. Now, mistake 7, not regularly monitoring and auditing passwords. Chloe, this is good for you. You've done site audits and cleanings in the past. I'm sure you've ran into situations where, you know, even after a cleaning, you know, passwords probably aren't changed sometimes. So what do you have for this one?
Yeah, so auditing is basically making sure that your users are using strong passwords and things like that, and they're keeping up some good password hygiene. Your employees making sure that they're holding up to the password policies placed in the company, things like that. And then monitoring is just making sure that those passwords, you don't happen to see them come across in a data breach or whatnot. So Have I Been Pwned is a great resource for checking out your password and making sure it hasn't been pwned. And so after surveying 1,000 American adults, there was a study that found that 64% had never checked to see if they were affected by any major data breaches. I find this really interesting. It's something you don't really know to do unless you know it exists. So it's very important to raise that awareness that you can check to see if your passwords or accounts have been in known compromises through several different platforms. So like Have I Been Pwned is one. It's a great one. You can sign up for notifications to see if you've ever been in a data breach. I personally have been in a data breach. They got my Domino's password, my Jimmy John's password, because I was reusing passwords at one point.
Me too.
It's terrible, but I did it.
That DoorDash thing, right? Or was it Grubhub?
Yeah, I don't know, because it ended up being like my Hulu account, my Netflix account, like every single account I had. And so that's also one great reason why you have password managers, because you can know, like, there's so many times where you create accounts and you just totally forget about your accounts. You forget that they exist. You forget everything. So it's nice to have a password manager to monitor where you have passwords and accounts. Before I get too off track, 1Password also has a watchtower feature that integrates with Have I Been Pwned, I believe, to check and see if your password has ever been in a compromise, and it'll alert you in there. It's really nice and easy. And then Gmail has a password monitor. Do you know anything about that?
No, I think Gmail actually has a different auditing tool. You know how you were saying how the last thing that you should always kind of keep logs of who was doing what when, if possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Gmail actually shows you like basically the last time you logged into your Gmail account and from what IP address and where. So like you can use it as an audit capability. You can check out, if some IP in, Uzbekistan has been logging into your email and you're not using a VPN endpoint in Uzbekistan, but you may have a very valid reason for doing that, then possibly your email address has been pwned, as they say.
Now there are some powerful password auditing tools. Do you guys want to go over those?
Yeah, so they're password crackers, technically speaking. I think most of them are just password crackers that you can use for password auditing. You're getting a little bit into the pen testing area. So there's like Cane Enable, it's a password recovery tool, THC Hydra, Encrack, John the Ripper, WP Scan. Those are all tools that you can use to brute force, dictionary attack, everything, your passwords. And so you can basically see if any of your users are using any passwords that attackers might be using on trying to brute force or guess your passwords. So those are great tools to use to see if you have your users or employees using strong passwords. Do we want to go deeper into each of those tools, or do you think just a little overview?
Yeah, I think that overview is probably fine just because we still got, 6 more things to cover. So,
yeah, speaking of that, this is a cool one, number 6. I think we should jump right in. Go for it, Ram. Give them number 6 here.
Well, I think Chloe's going to do the actual demo, but I've got a fun story. Number 6 is using passwords that aren't very complex. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which incidentally is the code I use on my luggage. Password, QWERTY, or password 1. So this is probably one of the only real scary stories I've got, is that maybe, I want to say 10, 12 years ago, I was working for a, large host and domain registrar, which you have probably heard of and seen commercials for. And at that time, we would have a lot of customers that would call in ordering domains or hosting, and they weren't by computer. So we would set their default password to password 1. And eventually we stopped doing that. But for a while, it turned out that a lot of people were not actually ever resetting that and just using that to log in. And it caused all sorts of problems. So I think they actually did end up forcing a reset on all of those. But yes, password 1 with a capital P, and good thing it doesn't work anymore.
I think Chloe's going to give us a demo here. Let us know in chat with a comment if you have used one of these passwords on the list. If you have not, then pat yourself on the back. Unfortunately, I have not used any of those, but unfortunately, there was a time when I've used some passwords that might have been worthy of that list, but we won't go into that. What do you have here, Chloe?
Yeah, so here I have WP Scan. I've already pre-run the brute force just for the sake of time, and my internet's a little bit slow today, so I didn't want to make us sit here for a couple minutes. But so what I did is I used WP Scan to run a scan, and I used a password list, rocku.txt, which is a list of commonly used passwords found in data breaches. And I pretend that I already enumerated usernames, and I found a username for my target site. So basically, I set the username, and I am trying to brute force with WP Scan. If we roll down here, here you can see that it performed a password attack using XML RPC, and it was successful with bad admin as the username and puppy dog as the password. And it took it about 10 seconds to figure that out. So basically highlights the importance of how quickly someone can guess your password to your site if you're using something weak or something known. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into some more of that later, but yeah, so make sure you're not doing that.
Avoid that if at all possible. So, we just like to take a moment to thank all of our premium subscribers. Thanks to you guys, we're able to do these streams. We're able to have Chloe and Ram research the way that they do, and they're constantly getting new blog posts out that have firewall rules included for our premium subscribers, and that adds a great deal of protection for our premium users. So thanks to everybody who is subscribing. If you'd like to support us, you can join the mailing list. You can like and subscribe to the channel here, or you can consider becoming a premium subscriber, which is $99 for a year, and that covers your site and your staging sites. And some of the features like the real-time IP blacklist, in my mind, it pays for itself for the $99. If you're currently a premium user, you can go over to your live traffic and check that out. You might be getting alerts already that shows the number of blocks that are being made. And that really cuts down on the password guessing attacks that we see, because before they even have the ability to get to your login form and guess, they are already blocked. And this is a list that we manage on our side. As soon as you put your license in, you're good to go. You don't have to enable anything. You don't have to manage a list. So that is one of the great premium features, as well as what I mentioned with the rules that Chloe and Ram and the rest of the threat intel team are getting out for everybody. So if you want to support Wordfence and help out with these streams and what we are doing, the premium license is a great way to go. Let's dive back into our list here. That was number 6, right? Yep. Passwords that are not complex. What do we have for mistake number 5 here?
I guess Chloe started hacking pretty early, right?
Yeah, I didn't even know it. Yeah, this one's fun because mistake number 5 is using personal information and passwords. And this is like one of my favorite stories because it's funny at this point. Because back then I know nothing. I didn't want anything to do with security. Like, I just hated it. But technically I was already hacking people. So in the 7th grade, I was able to guess 2 of my friends' Facebook passwords just by knowing some simple information about them. One of them was their favorite sport with their jersey number. That was their password. So that was pretty easy to guess. And the other one was just a phrase that they said all the time, like all the time. And I just tried it, like, because I was just like, maybe this will work. And I got in, and I'm so incriminating myself right now, but it's
only
fun.
If your friends are watching.
Yeah, we're not friends anymore, so
probably because you hacked them.
Yeah. All right.
Well, Chloe has hacked us live on the stream, and we're still friends with her, so I've forgiven her. But
also, if you do those surveys about, like, the first those surveys on social media, it's like, what street did you grow up on? What was the name of your first pet? What's your favorite color? All those things. Those are like password reset questions. Those are gathering data so that people can steal your accounts.
Yeah, like, don't use your dog's name for your password. I know you love your dog. I love my pets too, but don't use that as your password. Don't use birthdays. Don't use anything that's personal information that can easily be found on social media. Social media contains a plethora of information about us these days, so it's very important that your passwords don't signify anything personal about you, because it's so easy to find, which means it could be really easily guessable if you have maybe someone that's really targeting you and really wants to get into your account, like maybe a crazy ex or something, anything. So for those multi-factor questions, like Ram was saying, on Facebook, you have those like page long of like, what did you do last summer? What is your mother's maiden name? How many dogs do you have? What's your dog's name? I have a theory that these are plotted by attackers everywhere, trying to get all your information out there.
I hate those because I can't even remember the answers to those questions, but some attacker probably does.
Yeah, right?
It's like, maybe I should do some OSINT on myself, because I don't remember my own account security questions. They're like the worst kind of 2-factor authentication.
I hate those. I really do. Yeah.
Oh man.
It's never fun, never fun. So that was number 5, right? Using personal information in passwords. So that gives you some things to consider there, and that that kind of goes along with whenever you share passwords, even if it's a unique password, you're sharing a Netflix password. If somebody gets access to that, they're seeing other personal information, maybe a date of birth, an address, so on and so forth, and then that information can always be used. So there's a lot of different layers to that. Now, mistake number 4: not removing ex-employee and or developer or support user credentials.
Or default credentials. Don't forget default credentials.
Now, what can happen with this? Obviously, unfortunately, bad things and a lot of things, but you want to take this, Ram?
I think Chloe actually has a story for this one.
I have an ominous story, a vague story.
An ominous, vague story. Anywhere, to anyone.
Yeah, so there's been cases where companies have not forgotten, I would say, but missed a user's access to a certain platform and not forgot, because I don't want to say it was forgotten. It was just missed because it was missed. So this happens. I've seen it a couple times in site cleaning cases and other places and news stories and everything like that. But if you don't remove your ex-employee's credentials, they still have access. And if your ex-employee is mad, they can do things that you don't want them to do. So if they have access to Facebook, for example, maybe they could post something on your Facebook page to deter all your visitors from purchasing your product. Because let's say they're so angry and they just hate you forever. That can happen. So it's really important that you remove those access. So how to do this is you can make sure that you keep an access list of who has access to what resources when you're doing onboarding. So if you have a list of all the access that everybody has once you've onboarded them, you know exactly what access to revoke when you're letting them go. And you want to make sure that when you're letting them go, you revoke that access before they're let go. Or I'm not trying to say let go, because it could also be a developer that you've hired for a limited time that you wanted to do something, or it could also be a support person that you wanted to give access to your site for a little bit. But you want to make sure you keep an access list of that. And so once you're letting them go, you make sure that you go through the list and revoke all the access. It's highly recommended that you do it at the exact same time that they are being let go, but it's not always possible. So you want to make sure that you do it before you let them go. Just so they don't have that access right after, because they could be mad, they could be disgruntled, as we call them, and do things that they shouldn't be able to do once they don't have access or privileges with your company.
Yeah, like you said, it would be important to keep a list of what the access is, because it could be easy, depending on a company's size, to forget what somebody has access to. And after the fact, if things end badly, the next thing you know, access could be used for things that could just not be good for the company and everything in between. So keeping that list is a good thing. And security wise, I think it can really save you. So for our next one here, that was mistake number 4, not removing ex-employees and their support credentials, developer credentials, so on and so forth. For number 3, using passwords that are too short. And a few months back, it might have been 6 or 8 months ago, I ran into a website that I was trying to log back into. And I don't remember the site. It was something that I needed access to. And I tried to reset my password. And I realized why I couldn't get back in with my password. It was because their password requirements were so simple. I believe you could not use a password over 8 characters, and there could not be any symbols in the password. And it sort of baffled me, because at a time now where using more than 8 characters should be standard, and multiple special characters, I'm trying to log into a website and it's telling me that I need to set a password with less than 8 characters. So using passwords that are too short. Now this makes password cracking much more simpler, right, Ram, Chloe?
Yeah. Here's the thing. A long password that's only letters or spaces is going to be a lot harder to crack than a short password that has, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters. Also, if it's a longer password that's easier to remember is easier to remember and more secure. So I mean, don't use correct horse battery staple because enough people have used that it has shown up in data breaches. You know the XKCD I'm talking about, but longer is better than shorter. 8 to 10 characters is kind of a minimum, but I mean, a 6-character password can be cracked in a matter of potentially days, depending on, the computing platform you're cracking it on. So the longer, the better. A good mix of characters does make it more secure, but when in doubt, go for length. And, if you're not using a password manager, ease to remember over just complexity and short. And make it unique. Create a new password for every service you use, and that's easier if you use a password manager.
Now we have, is it Kaspersky that has the tool to test your password strength?
Kaspersky. I like saying it that way. I think that is actually correct,
Kaspersky.
But they do have
Kaspersky.
I think they do have a password strength meter, and I mean, like WordPress comes in with a built-in password strength meter when you reset the password on a user. But the Kaspersky one actually tells you how long it'll take to crack the password, which is something the WordPress password strength thing doesn't include.
Is that what you were using, Chloe? I remember a few weeks back you had the one site that showed how long it would take to crack a password. That was a pretty handy tool.
The other one I've used before is How Secure Is My Password. And one thing I want to mention real quick is don't put your real password in here, because they say it's not stored, but you never know. So just do like similar passwords to your password just to give it a look. But I wanted to show you real quick. If your password is Sally1, it would take 31 seconds to crack. But if your password is just a bunch of letters, let's see, 1,000 centuries. So this isn't 100% accurate, but it gives you a good idea that complexity is not as important as length, but they are both important. So yeah, you can have fun playing around with this and just see what different combinations look like and how long it would take them to crack, because it's a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah, that would be useful to see, if you're wondering if you're using a password that needs to be changed, rule of thumb, if there's any doubt, then maybe there's no doubt, and just go ahead, and if you're using a password manager, generate a complex password. If you're not, then now might be a good time to start, and you can generate something good there, and it'll be easy to use. Anything else on this section before we move on?
Nope, I think we should move on because we still got a couple to cover. They're both very important.
Up towards an hour. Yes, we are on mistake number 2 here. Time flies when you're having fun. What do we have for mistake number 2?
Multi-factor authentication, which technically the security questions count as, but I hate them, so I don't really consider them real multi-factor. Chloe, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, so technically those are not multi-factor authentication because you need to use 2 separate forms of authentication. So your security questions are something you know, and your password is also something you know. So technically, you're not really using 2 factors of authentication. Fun fact. And I hate those things too. But so multi-factor authentication is basically using two or more. So 2-factor is 2 combinations. Multi-factor is typically more than 2. So it's using those different types of authentication to authenticate yourself. So there's 5 common ones. So it's going to be something you know, which is going to be like your password. There's something you have, which is going to be your authenticator app or your SMS text messages that you get on your phone. That's something you physically have. Something you do, which could be like swiping a pattern on a screen. Something you are, that's going to be biometrics like your fingerprint and palm scan, eye scans, things like that. And then somewhere you are is another form. That's going to be like, it's less common as something you enable, but it's more like a 3rd form of authentication that's kind of there for you. So like Google, I've noticed, will lock you out if you're logging in from a different location. So that's one form of authentication that they're doing for you.
And that not quite as secure as just a single second factor, right? It's better to have that in addition to some other factor, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think the somewhere you are is kind of just like a third one that tags along. It's not really like you want that as your second one. But yeah, so when you're using multi-factor or two-factor, you're using two of those or more to authenticate. So the most common is going to be your password and then an authenticator app. And just want to mention that you should not be using SMS authentication on your phone anymore because that can be easily bypassed or intercepted. And then I think Ram has some more juicy details on why not using multi-factor authentication is so important.
Okay, so I do want to preface this with it's better to use SMS authentication than it is to use no two-factor authentication.
Yes.
But if you can use like an on-device prompt, that's better. But there was a guy a couple of years ago that lost $100,000 worth of cryptocurrency from a SIM porting attack, which is basically where an attacker calls up your phone company, says, hey, I have this phone number, which just happens to be the victim's phone number. Can you put it on this SIM card because I'm, changing devices or whatever? And they'll just do it if like something like the last four of their social security number or something. This is kind of a persistent problem. Part of it is just that phone companies don't authenticate and identify people calling in very well in the interest of making the customer experience easy. But yes, it is possible for a targeted attack to overcome SMS-based two-factor authentication fairly easily. Though, again, it is still way better than nothing because it will stop 100% of just random bots who happen to know your credentials. And hey, if you get an SMS that someone tried to sign in on your account, then someone has your password and you should change it. Though on-device prompts are still better because they also alert you that someone has your password and should change it. And they're way harder for an attacker to do something like a SIM porting attack on.
Yeah, that would not be a good feeling, having a text come over saying, here's your 6-digit code for your bank account or, another important site. That's an immediate red flag to get over there and change it. Okay, that brings us to mistake number 1. This was the mistake that we had you guess at the beginning of the show for the swag. So
Chloe, 5 of you are already going to get socks. I guarantee 5 of you are already guessed.
Yes, I'm sure. Chloe, do you want to start off for this?
Yeah, sure. So I have a fun story. I'm pretty sure we probably all have a fun story about reusing passwords. But back in the day, I used to use one strong password across like everything. I was like, it's a strong password. It'll be great for everything. So it doesn't matter. But that strong password got compromised in a data breach. And now my strong password is compromised everywhere. So all my accounts are compromised. So reusing passwords is really, really bad, even if it's a strong password, because it can still be compromised. So don't you reuse passwords. Does anybody else have any fun stories? I'm curious.
None that I want to share. But
I would be in that same boat, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, the 2012 Dropbox breach was the result of password reuse. And I guess a Dropbox employee's corporate account was reused on LinkedIn, which was obtained via another breach. Like, breaches lead to more breaches, as I mentioned kind of at the beginning of this. LastPass's annual global password security report says that a lot of employees reuse single passwords 13 times on average, like in 13 different places. So yeah, here's some actual stats. 45% did not consider password reuse to be serious. 52% share their streaming site passwords. 31% use the same password for streaming sites as they do for other more sensitive accounts, such as online banking. And 21% don't know whether the people they share their passwords with also share with other people. Sharing is not caring when it comes to passwords, okay? So Have I Been Pwned is a great resource to check if your password has been in a data breach. It should be safe to actually enter in your password on there, largely because what it does is it hashes the password first, and then it just sends a portion of the hash over, so you're not at any point actually transmitting your password to them. And Wordfence actually has a built-in feature when you're trying to change to a new password for like an administrative account, where it'll check Have I Been Pwned to see if the password trying to use has in fact been pwned. And will tell you that, hey, this has been found in a data breach. You should use a different password. So I believe that's on by default. please don't turn it off unless you would like to get hacked, which I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Jason in chat said this was a great review session, and hopefully that's what it is for a lot of people. Hopefully you're using two-factor authentication, you're using a complex password, ideally a password manager, as we said, and it's never too basic for you just don't want to overlook this stuff. So it being a good review session is a great thing because you have a lot of important information that's behind these passwords and your credentials. So before we announce the winners and wrap things up, anything, Ram, Chloe?
Just that all day I dream about socks.
There we go. I have mine somewhere, but I couldn't find them in the pre-show. But thankfully, Ram was willing to sort of model them for us, and we got the horror story voice, so it was kind of a 2-for-1 today. Chloe, before we clock out here, anything to add? I mean, there was a lot of good information.
Yeah, I just saw that someone did mention that you should frequently change your passwords, and I totally forgot to mention this at one point, but you definitely should change your passwords for your most critical sites, at least. I want to say once a year. I mean, it really depends, but best standard is like 90 days, but that's a lot. So like at least once a year would be great. So make sure you're changing your really important passwords, and yeah. Every so often.
If you're going out to a year and you still have, you're using a password manager, I think Watchtower, the feature in OnePass, it'll kind of alert you if there's anything up, and there's other features similar to that. So if something, if there was a breach or something like that, and then that's something to immediately take a look at. So our winners of the swag, we had 5 winners. And we were giving out 5. It was the first 5 guesses. We had Jacob, Andrew Clayton, Joss Cleaver, hope I said that right, Dave Harrington, and Andrew Slay. So I believe you submitted an email address with your submission, so we will be getting word over to you and get some contact information for you to send that out. We really appreciate you stopping by, hanging out, and submitting the form there. So I think that about wraps it up for us. We really appreciate everybody coming over and hanging out with us and doing this every week. We've been doing this every Tuesday, 12 noon, 9 Pacific time. If you haven't already, go ahead and like the video underneath on YouTube. You can also subscribe, and that'll let us know that you want more similar content, more streams in the future. If you hit the bell after you subscribe, you will be notified whenever we go live or when we post something. We don't put a lot of videos out, so you're not going to get overwhelmed. But when we do post something, it's informational for setting up Wordfence or protecting your site. So keep that in mind. You can also check out our mailing list, which is in the footer of the wordfence.com site. That'll keep you informed of anything that Chloe or Ram or the rest of the threat intel team finds. It might be the first that you hear about a new security issue, which could potentially be impacting your site. As a premium subscriber, you would get those firewall rules immediately if they're released, when they're released. As a free user, you have a lot of the functionality of the Wordfence plugin, but you get new firewall rules 30 days later most of the time. Also in the footer of the wordfence.com page, we have a podcast. Right now we're doing a shorter 5 to 10 minute podcast to get you up to date with the security news for the week, so you can check that out there. We mentioned the premium features. You can support us with the $99 license. That'll cover a whole multi-site if you're running one. It'll also cover your staging site if you have a single site as well. So there's a lot of value there. It includes the country blocking, which we didn't talk about much, but country blocking is excellent for protecting your login form. You can just block your login form from all of the countries that you're not expecting to have logins from. So if you're the single administrator on your account, you're logging in from the United States, it might be safe to just go ahead and block the rest of the remaining countries from your login form. and not have to worry about the firewall, using those 5 or 10 attempts and the password resets and so on and so forth. Also, we have Wordfence Central. You can check that out, add your sites there. It's a free service. You can go to wordfence.com/central. What it is it's a central hub to monitor the security of all of your sites that have Wordfence on it, whether they're premium or free. So you can check that out. You can also apply templates to the sites. If you have 5 sites on there, maybe you want them all set up the same way, you can set up one template, just select all the sites and apply it there. Also, check out open.film, short film about the WordPress community. We talked about this last week when we had Mark Monder on, the CEO of Wordfence. So go back and check that out. Talks about what we did with that film. Gives a really good look of the WordPress community. A bunch of cool interviews in there. And if you haven't been to a WordCamp or you plan on going, once things open back up, it gives you a really good idea of the people that you're going to see. In the meantime, we look forward to seeing you next week when we'll be talking more security, and we appreciate everybody stopping by. So until next week, from all of us here at Wordfence, have a good one, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.